Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this breakout session, this interesting breakout session, I guess. Thank you to those that are here in the room and those on WebEx who are connected remotely. We are going to begin. Let me begin by introducing myself and the panelist. I am Maria Lamas, the head of the Spanish Agency of Medicines and Medical Devices, and I will be the facilitator of this meeting. Emilia will help me as a rapporteur to collect the key messages to be taken tomorrow morning to the plenary. And the presentations will begin with Stefan van der Spiegel from the European Commission, team leader on blood cells and tissues, medicinal substances. And he's not going to be the first speaker. The first speaker will be Klaus Krudwig from the EMA. He will give us an overview of the supply of immunoglobulins, the current situation of the immunoglobulin supply in the EU. Afterwards, we will listen to Stefan van der Spiegel. As I was saying, he's a team leader of substances of human origin in the European Commission, DG Sante. Afterwards, we will listen to Daphna Tixen-Timmer and Fabio Candura. They will present the European Project Supply Project. This is a project aimed to strengthen the unpaid donation capacity in the EU. And Daphne Tixen-Timmer is the director of the Sanquin Blood Bank in the Netherlands, vice president of the executive board of the European Blood Association, and Fabio Candura, he's the director of the plasma and plasma-derived medicinal products area in the National Blood Center within the National Institute of Health in Italy. These presentations, I will ask our speakers to adjust to the time, 15 minutes for every presentation, because after these presentations, I would like to open the floor to patients, healthcare professionals, and industry to give us your insights, perspective, remarks, comments, and then we can have all of us an open discussions. The aim of this breakout session is to analyze the situation of the supply of immunoglobulins. Immunoglobulins have a specific and differential aspect with regards to other medicines, and that is that the raw material is human plasma. So this is a situation with many different angles, and I guess that this comprehensive panel will help us to understand better which is the situation and even to find potential solutions at the end of the meeting. If we are able to do that, we can wrap up the session and select some key messages to be taken tomorrow morning to plenary. So I will not take more of your time. We will begin. Please, 15 minutes every speaker. We will begin with Klaus. Klaus, please go on.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So good afternoon, colleagues. It's a great pleasure being here and presenting actually, or giving you an overview of the immunoglobulin supply situation in the European Union economic area. So the aim of this presentation is, first of all, I would like to give you an overview about recent initiatives for monitoring supply of plasma-derived medicinal products, and especially immunoglobulins. And then in the second part of the presentation, I would like to give you an overview of our preliminary results that we have received from conducting a survey actually within the member states and also the marketing authorization holders for immunoglobulins. So not sure if can I have the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So starting with the recent initiatives for monitoring the supply of plasma-derived medicinal products. So we actually have in the SPOC working party, which is the working party that has been established as of the extended mandate of the EMA, we have regular updates provided to the SPOC Working Party on the immunoglobulin situation during its monthly meetings. So also shortages of immunoglobulins have been discussed in the SPOC Working Party since 2019 and also brought to the attention of the MSSG. So we have regular exchange with the European Commission SOHO team, with EDQM and ECDC, as well through the blood clusters with international regulators like the FDA and Health Canada. So I would like to point out that 2 surveys have been conducted in 2021 and 2022 to map actually the shortages and the availability issues of IV and SC human normal immunoglobulins, and also to investigate the root causes. So two surveys have been actually conducted on the impact of COVID-19 on PDMP supply. The next slide actually provides an overview about one of the very recent activities, and that's the drafting group of the SPOC Working Party that has been established to dedicate analyze the supply and availability of immunoglobulins in the European Union economic area. So the drafting group has been set up, or the subgroup of the SPOC Working Party has been set up in February 2022, and we have representative of 5 member states there. So these are the SPOC Working Party members, and also experts from the member states that participate in the meetings. We have also the European Commission, Unit B4 from DG Sante, representative there, and from EMA, of course, colleagues from our work stream. We have also representative from the product leads for plasma-derived medicinal products and from the hematology working party. So there, the scientific secretariat and the chair are represented. So in the next slide, actually, I would like to give you a short overview about the results, on the surveys that have been conducted in 2022, in 2020 and in 2021 on the impact of COVID-19 on plasma-derived medicinal product supply. So as mentioned, 3 surveys were sent to plasma master file holders in April, October 2020 and February 2021 to understand the impact of COVID-19 on authorized medicines where plasma is used for its manufacture. So another aim was to get a forecast actually in the months of plasma master file holders' current inventory for the European Union market, assuming normal demand patterns. So all plasma PMF holders confirmed they had activated mitigation plans to meet their commitments to patients. So coming to the shortages situation, so shortages of immunoglobulins have been notified to EMA in December 2020 and January 2021. So all PMF holders confirmed that they have sufficient inventory for the European Union market. No additional shortage notification have been received since January 2021. The next slide is actually the first slide on the survey on the availability of IV and ST human normal immunoglobulins that we have conducted. The SPOC Working Party has been conducted in 2022. So the main objectives here of the survey that has been conducted are to receive an overview of the availability and the shortage situation of the individual products in the individual countries. So another aim was to receive an overview about the availability of stock level information and an overview of the historical consumption and the forecast demand data. So far, we started to analyze the results in depth. And so in depth, and in this presentation currently, we are only focusing on the availability shortage situation of the products. So the scope of the survey was really to get information from national authorized products on national authorized products from NAPs. These information were submitted by the NCAs. For centrally authorized products, so for the CAPs, marketing authorization holders were contacted directly with EMA, and we are working closely together with them. So far, 24 member states submitted information, and currently the data are included from 19 member states. So turning to the next page gives you actually an overview of the 3 graphs that I would like to present today. So, and as mentioned before, these are preliminary results. So here we have an overview of the products that are marketed in the individual countries, and the number of products actually that are affected by a market disruption in 2022. So when we look at the graph on the left side, for example, A, we see that there is a particular country that in that 19 products are marketed and 11 are at the time of the when we received the data were in shortage. So the date was the time period was in September, October 2022. So we further, and when we look at the colors, actually, we can differentiate between current market disruptions. We have in yellow market disruptions that are resolved in 2022, and we have anticipated market disruptions. And the gray area represents the products that are not disrupted at this time point. So again, so we see then that actually three products are actually where market disruption is anticipated in country number A. So one of the conclusions that we can draw here is actually that 4 out of 19 countries so far were analyzed were not affected by a market disruption in 2022. So also it is remarkable that in some countries actually a high percentage actually of products are affected by a market disruptions from all marketed products. So the next slide actually gives an overview about the different countries actually that are affected by disruption of at least one of their products per year. So here we are really not looking at the details, for example, how many products were affected. It only counts that one of the countries had at least one product that was affected per year. So the period here is from between 2013 and 2022. And as we can clearly see, there is an increase in the number of shortages that are reported starting in 2018. So we have currently in 2022, 15 of the 19 countries affected by at least one product of the marketed products. So the next slide gives an overview actually about the root causes of the shortage. And here I would really like to say, yeah, thank you so much. So here I would really like to point out that we are really at the beginning to analyze the data. So we have used actually the SPOC network definition, so the classification of the different shortages root causes, and we have applied this here. So what we see is actually, and as you may know, actually the root causes or the SPOC network definitions, there are 8 different categories. And so a large percentage actually of the root causes that have been reported are due to manufacturing challenges. So and also another high percentage is actually an unexpected increase in demand. And in terms of 19%, actually, we have seen that an unpredicted major events or natural disasters was the root cause of the shortage. So this is actually something that we need to better understand, to better understand and to understand in more detail. So for example, the 4% others that are reported and at the very top, this can include, for example, regulatory issues or may also include distribution issues. So the SPOC network classification actually has been applied successfully here in this case. And as I mentioned, so we of course asked for much further detail actually on the detailed root causes of the shortages. And this is something we're going to carefully analyze actually in the next coming weeks and months. So the next slide already presents my conclusion and also the next steps that I would like to share with you. So in terms of conclusions, the number of countries that are impacted by the shortage of immunoglobulins is increasing when we look at the data that we have received and I presented. Only 4 out of the 19 countries were not affected by a market disruption in 2022. And again, so we need to better understand and better also analyze, so to better understand this information and also look at it in an overall context. So analysis of the demand and supply data is ongoing. And as mentioned, only data related to shortages was analyzed so far. A detailed analysis of the root causes mitigation measures will also be performed. And EMA, of course, continues to monitor shortages of immunoglobulins through the SPOC Working Party. And we will continue to facilitate regular dialogues with marketing authorization holders to obtain a detailed overview of the availability and to discuss, of course, potential support measures to prevent or mitigate shortages in the European Union economic area. With this, I would like to end my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Klaus.
Thank you, Marie, and good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for inviting me and to present you an overview of the European Union's policy and legislation in the field of blood and blood components. If I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So to start, I think it was good to take a step back and show specifically what is so different for plasma-derived medicinal products like immunoglobulins compared to any other medicinal products. And it is, of course, because they have active pharmaceutical ingredient that comes out of humans, so from the population that makes donations of plasma and blood. Of course, the later steps, manufacturing, marketing, authorization, pricing, and reimbursement are known, and like in other fields of pharmaceuticals, but the first steps, they're really taking care in dedicated health services where citizens can come to donate blood or to donate plasma, and then there's a handover to of the pooled plasma to an industrial setting to manufacture those therapies. Next, please. Okay, so I will. To start, maybe I thought it was also good to refer a bit to what we can do and are mandated to do at the European Union level. And actually the mandates on those two parts of the supply chain, the first steps where the collection is to be organized from the citizens, and the later steps where the manufacturing is to be organized. The two mandates for that are laid down in the same article of the Treaty of the Function of the European Union, the Constitution, which managed to set down high standards of quality safety, both for blood and blood derivatives and for medicinal products. For blood products, it's important also to refer to another part of that mandate, Articles 1687, because it's clear and needs to remain, we need to keep well in our minds that the responsibilities in the end for the organization of health services, where the collections are taking place, is really in the responsibility of the member state. It's not an EU level responsibility. Next, please. So then a step, and I will focus the main part of the presentation now on this framework on substance of human origin, and just very schematically explained how do we ensure safety quality in those settings for blood, but it's equally applying for tissue cells and for organs. We have 3 levels of requirements on all the steps from a donor body to a recipient body. And so, of course, as said, the first steps that are important for plasma derivatives. So the first level of requirements is on the professionals who organize the whole collection and donation steps. So they need to make sure they work with the right donors. There needs to be testing for all kinds of communicable diseases. And then, of course, there's also quality requirements. How do you handle the collected plasma well? Then there's a second level of requirements, and every member state is expected to have a national competent authority to organize oversight. That entails authorization, inspection, vision, traceability, measures of all those services. And in Germany, for example, that's the Paul Ehrlich Institute. In Spain, it's a dedicated institute, the ONT. And then there's also a level of requirements in the EU legislation on us, on the European Commission team, to support the whole sector, in particular with coordination and also some IT alert platforms. Next. So as you probably will know, this legal framework that I schematically presented is currently on the table for revision because we found a couple of shortcomings that needed to be addressed. And I want in the next 2-3 slides to briefly present the key revisions that I think are of relevance for the discussion today. A first one, and I will not go through the details of it, but it's really an intention to make sure we have strong donor protection for all donors of substances of human origin. And that entails a couple of measures that are listed there, but I want to underline particularly the need to evaluate the donor's health to make sure he himself is fit to make a good donation. And that entails also in some situations like frequent donations of plasma and monitoring of donors. And this is really an essential element across substance of human origin to make sure that we have a population that trusts in making donations and making those therapies available. And that includes, of course, the more than 50 million blood plasma donors across the EU. Next. The second element to underline is the principle of voluntary unpaid donation, which is kind of a translation of a principle that is also set in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, so the part of the EU Constitution, the principle of not making financial gains out of the human body. So it is forbidden in the SOHO settings to provide financial incentives for donors. Of course, we need to keep in mind that there are also some costs and efforts to be made in donors, and therefore not providing those incentives, we should also make sure there's no disincentives to donate. So what the legal proposal is really aiming for is to make sure there can be appropriate compensations to be defined by the different member states, but in a kind of gray zone of financial neutrality that doesn't allow for gains nor for losses for the donors. So it's really important because in say payment itself is not necessarily a motivator to donate, but there should also not be, of course, demotivators. And of course, as I said, this is a principle that's important for the broader population and on the entire SOHO landscape. Next. And then a third element to underline from the proposal is some measures on supply continuity. But I have immediately underlined here that we are a bit at the limit of our EU legal mandate, which is really safety and quality. Nevertheless, we do include some measures to promote SOHO donation activities, also some measures that would allow monitoring, activity data reporting, with possibilities for supply alerts, having emergency plans in place. And also the fact that we'll have more standardized technical rules should facilitate the inter-country exchange of those therapies. And of course, here it's important to underline that this work will need to connect very well to the work we saw presented earlier this afternoon by EMA on medicinal products monitoring. So it's important that the first part of the chains monitoring is well connected to the second part of the chains monitoring. What I also want to underline here is that these are just support measures, because in the end, the real organization of collection of blood and plasma remains within the national health system. So it's a real national decision and organization to do. But of course, at EU level, we can offer support, and we are doing that. We have done that during COVID times with a specific instrument, and we will later hear this afternoon from a ongoing project, a supply project. Maybe it's also worthwhile mentioning here that in the current views of the European Parliament and what we know about it, that this point is also really listed there to have really national plans for collection. Next. So, and then after having showed a bit what are the key elements from the legal framework, I just maybe want to hold a bit and to just stop a moment. Where is the plasma today now coming from for the EU immunoglobulins for the EU patients? Basically, there's three sources, and on the left top, there's the public collectors in the European Union, and they are active in all the EU member states, and they're typically part of the public healthcare services, like a national blood service, or they can also be non-profit organizations that do that for them, like typically it would be the Red Cross. And they historically really get a lot of plasma recovered from those whole blood donations, where the plasma, the liquid part, is not really needed for transfusion, so it can be used to manufacture those medicines. But increasingly, we see that they're also shifting to plasmapheresis programs, so just plasma collection, and that offers quite some potential, given that there is more than 50 million regular blood donors that could give this kind of donations. Then, of course, there's a second very important source, and that is from the private collectors within the EU, and they are active today in 4 countries, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. They only work with this plasmapheresis donations, and that allows them also to work with more frequent donors, and also they work with a much smaller pool of donors. And then, of course, there's a gap. As we know, we don't have enough plasma collected today within the EU, so that gap is filled today from private collections in the US, again, from plasmapheresis programs. Needs to be underlined, however, that the US is really like the collector for the whole world. So it creates, of course, as rightfully we are all concerned about, a strategic dependency for the EU and for the EU patients on this US supply, where somehow the EU is in competition with other regions of the world to get that plasma. Next. And then if we look a bit further into the plasma collection within the EU, and first of all, I want to thank the European Directorate on the Quality of Medicines for those data, but I think it's already important, just as a first comment, to mention that the data are only very fragmented, and that's one of the concerns, issues, and I think that's also why it's good that in the legal proposal we really aim for better monitoring and data reporting. So here you see data of 11 member states where there could be a comparison made between 2019 and 21 data, and overall already it's maybe important to set for those 11 countries in that time window they reduced. There was a slight reduction in plasma collection, while of course, as we all know, the demand on plasma-derived medicinal product in that period has increased. We also see that the member states that have private collectors, they have the highest volumes per capita at this moment. We also see, however, that there are drops in all settings, the public and the private settings, and there's drops and increases. So there's no real line that can be drawn into that. What can be noted, however, also is that there are some public sector countries like Denmark and Netherlands that are investing in plasmapheresis programs, and where you see indeed an increase, a steady increase. And maybe the last point important for the discussion later is also that there's no clear link between how much plasma is collected in a country, and in the end, what is the availability, the supply, and the possible shortages of plasma-derived medicinal products. Next, please. I think I can skip this slide because we had very good presentations in the previous sessions on all the initiatives under the pharma legal framework. I just maybe want to underline that there was dedicated monitoring activities in EMA during the COVID-19 crisis on the plasma-derived medicinal product supply. Next. What I really would like to underline is that what in the end we will need to facilitate the supply is stronger coherence between the two legal frameworks. And we have that already in a certain sense and on the technical guideline level, so that level 1, as I said, what do the professionals need to do? There is a good set of dedicated GMP for this sector, and that was developed together by the pharma and the SOHO authorities. Also then on the second level, the oversight level, we see that there's need for connection on elements like traceability, vigilance, also inspections, authorizations. It's good, for example, to see that there's a dedicated SOHO inspection working group that is coordinating quite well with the PICS group. But I think it's really important that we further strengthen our coordination between the sectors. We had actually a very good ad hoc experience during the COVID crisis with the EMA colleagues and the blood products working party and the plasma master file. I think we could with them really discuss if we could create more flexibility in some donor deferral criteria, like men having sex with men or tattoos. We also could really explore ways to make the inspections of third country facilities more flexible with distant inspections, for example. But I think it's important that we really make that coordination more structural. That's why, again, that is embedded in the SOHO proposal. So there will be, there's a really call for coordination at national level between the SOHO and pharma authorities, and also to mirror that at EU level with the new SOHO coordination board. Next. And I'm coming to the end, and this is a picture I'm often showing in presentations on plasma. It's an older picture. It is actually dating from before the COVID crisis. It was a workshop that we did with together with the EDQM in 2019, where EDQM brought together all the key stakeholders in the sector along the whole chain, from donors over collectors, manufacturers, professionals who prescribe patients, and then also the authorities and EU-level coordinating authorities. And for each of them, some actions were written down. I'm not going to go through them, but I think the message here is, if we want to address this problem, we really need actions for everybody, and everybody will have to play its role in making sure we have a good balanced supply and demand for our EU citizens to access those therapies. And then I come next to my concluding slide. So maybe to wrap up a bit, so as said, the active pharmaceutical ingredient of plasma-derived medicinal products comes from donations by citizens of blood plasma. It therefore is available in every EU country, and it depends, however, on firstly the public awareness, willingness to donate, but we feel that that is quite high actually. So it also depends in particular on the capacity to collect. And then if we look into the capacities, we see that it differs really per country. And I think the presence of private collectors is important. In those countries, we see at this moment really the highest collections volumes. But there also, I think, we see a real potential to convert blood donors in the public service into plasma donors. And I think we'll hear from that also from the supply sector. And again, I want to underline that it doesn't mean because a country collects a lot of plasma that there is a good local supply of the end medicine, because there's really still an allocation decision factor to be taken into account. So the shortages of plasma-derived medicinal products are really driven by a supply-demand disbalance, and as that, as the growth for demand is higher than the growth for collection, that is only increasing, and we need to compensate that even more with import from the US. So to counter that, we really will require actions across the entire chain. And then as concluding points, of course, we can and have to do much more on the EU legislation, both from SOHO Pharma in particular, to make sure there's more coherence. But the real supply and the demand questions will only be answered by organizational measures at national level. So that was what I wanted to present here for the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you for this complementary view of the problem, given that the raw material of immunoglobulins are blood components. So thank you, very useful contribution. And now it's a turn for Daphne and
thank you.
And Fabio, thank you.
Yes, I will start our presentation, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present the supply project to this forum. So a lot of background has already been shared by Stefan. So in the next slide, I will give a little bit more. We all know what this is about. We have shortages of plasma-derived medicine. We know that Europe is increasingly dependent on the EU. There are also large differences in the usage of immunoglobulins between countries. And we've seen during COVID and also other political and economical developments that there's an increased urgency to building resilience in crisis situations, meaning that we need to make sure that we always collect enough plasma in order to provide sufficient supply to our patients. What we also see is that sufficient collection of plasma in a country does not automatically mean that there's sufficient supply for its inhabitants. So in the presentation of Stefan, there were 4 countries that collect a lot of plasma, but in some of those countries, there are shortages for patients. So this is a very strange situation, and I will explain to you how this can happen and what we can do about that. We do know that in countries where not-for-profit blood establishments collect plasma, we have a key to increase this plasma collection while safeguarding donor safety as well. So in the next slide, you will see a picture. It's already old. It's 2019 and 2020, but you see that Europe collects only 15% of the need that they have, which is actually 25% of the global presence of plasma. So in 2019, the gap was 2.2 million liters of plasma. And in 2020, that already increased to 3.5 million liters. So that's huge. That's the amount of plasma that the US collects in order to provide us with enough plasma medicine. Next one. So we started the supply project, which is about strengthening the unpaid plasma collection capacity in Europe with the goals to provide enough essential PDMPs for our patients and come up with recommendations and good practices of all stakeholders. So who are these stakeholders? The supply project was initiated by the EBA, so that's the European Blood Alliance. That's an organization which has a lot of blood establishments from different European countries, together with IPFA, with the European Hematology Association, of course, with our donors and patients. We have this very large consortium working on this project. Next one. So what are we going to do? We would really like to come up with best practices for the entire chain. So plasma is collected from donors. So what we need is enough donors. There's a potential of a lot of citizens who donate blood. There's an even higher percentage of citizens that might be able to donate plasma as well. So what about recruitment? And of course, we need to make sure that the donor safety is always there. So we would also like to come up with best practices in how to protect our plasma donors in terms of frequency and in terms of donor health. Then there is the issue of plasmapheresis programs, because of course, from a whole blood donation, you also receive plasma. So part of the whole blood is plasma already. But if you want to increase your plasma collection, you need to set up plasmapheresis programs. These are quite expensive. So it's very important that countries know how to set up these centers in order to do this cost efficiently and have enough with the proper quality requirements. Then in work package 4, Fabio will explain later on a bit more. We will talk about the national and EU infrastructure, the policy and the legal framework for plasma collection and supply. Let me explain. There are many differences between countries in how they handle their plasma. So there are countries that sell their plasma to fractionators, and then that's it. They just buy them on the open market. There are also countries who sell their plasma to fractionators and then ask them to give them back certain products. And there are many models in between. And I think Fabio can tell a lot more about the different models. But I really need to stress that this is the key issue that we need to talk about. How do member states handle their plasma policy, and do they even have a policy? So this is a very important topic of our project. And then at the end, we will also look at the supply to the patient, so appropriate use, because again, there are many differences in the usage of the PDMPs. And of course, if we are able to use less, we also need less plasma. Next one. So what is needed is, of course, collect sufficient plasma, but also have proper policies. And for the donors, it's very important that we create awareness. We need to recruit and retain sufficient plasma donors, and this is an issue. Now, a lot of donors know about whole blood donation. Not many donors know what it is to donate plasma. So this is a very important topic. Second one, efficiency. Like I said, cost-efficient programs to do plasmapheresis. Plasma economics, that's another one. The total cost structure of this value chain is not always known. So we need money to increase the plasmapheresis programs. But then again, the selling price of the plasma is quite low, which means that blood establishments do not have sufficient financial resources to set up these programs. So here, member states and health authorities are needed to make this happen. And also, I think fractionators should take responsibility here as well. And of course, education. So we really need to educate all the stakeholders in this chain on what is happening with plasma, and that we really need to take ownership of the plasma as a strategic resource as it comes from a donor. So this is really a public resource. And we have some excellent examples in member states where health authorities are more involved in the plasma chain. These blood establishments are more likely to initiate successful plasmapheresis programs. So where are we now? Next one, please. The supply project started last year, September. We have a website. We send out our first survey, which Fabio will talk about in a minute now. We're making overviews of the manufacturing process that come up soon. Report on best practices in plasma collection is expected in April. We shared expertise, or we asked for expertise on the quality of the collected plasma with fractionators as well. And we're analyzing the results. And there are 2 more surveys on the way. One is on donor protection practices, and the other one is on the usage of the PDMPs and also on the prioritization of PDMPs. So that was it from my part, and I would like to hand over the floor to Fabio.
Thank you, Daphne. Just to present some of the insight of this quite exhaustive survey that we distributed and disseminated along the last months of the 2022. And since my experience in this field is one of the most comprehensive survey ever done, try to covering many aspects of the plasma chain, plasma and PDMP chain. Next slide, please. This is my disclosure. Thank you. We have the pleasure and the honor also to coordinate such a team of mainly composed of national competent authorities on the issue. So we have a clear insight of what is inside the questionnaire. With the next slide, please. With the global end of supporting the general objective of the supply project is to formulate recommendation for the development of proposal for common EU policies on supply plasma and PDMP manufacturing through, and our contribution is done through, get a clear insight of the current European legal frameworks through assessing what is the demand for PDMPs and and what is necessary to produce them in terms of the supply of plasma, and above all also try to define the different tendering models that are in place in the EU. Obviously through, as Daphne was saying before, through an economic perspective to give such a clear overview. Next slide. The objectives of the questionnaire were to so investigate the presence and the effectiveness of different national legal policies from one side, and the second one is to define the framework to mitigate the effects of the decrease in plasma availability as we faced a couple of years ago. Next, please. So the survey has been launched by the mid of October, and so we collected data until the end of the year, on the 31st of December, and with dedicated contacts and interview until the end of January. We are in the middle of analyzing the results. Please, next. What is the methodology we are using? So the target groups are the competent authorities for blood and blood components. We are collecting data about on 19 and 2020 data. In some cases, we receive also 2021 data. Trying to understand the 5 different topics. So from the strategic independence of collection of plasma fractionation to the management of PDMPs coming from national plasma and demands and assessing needs, and also the plasma economics, read through the grid of the 5 main items in the second box, the box below, that are the each specific national legal framework, legal or framework or policies, so health policies, programs concerning the PDMP's manufacturing distribution. Next, please. The survey contains 5 sections, main information of national collection of plasma, information on plasma fractionated into PMP, obviously the information regarding legislative framework, program and policies, and specifically on collection of plasma, appropriate and rational use of PDMPs, the prioritization of the utilization of the user of a PDMP, and policies on or legal frameworks on the management of the excesses and shortages, of PDMP. 4th section is about the quality of plasma for fractionation, and the 5th, all the financial aspects related to collection, manufacturing, distribution, and funding. Some preliminary results of the survey. Next slide. Data, they belong to the European Commission, so we try to understand which can be given to which of them can be given to this meeting. We covered the 22 member states for more or less 92% of the total EU population. The first thing that the blood component, blood and blood component national competent authorities, they are under different rules, they live in different buildings. It depends on the member states. So this make probably from this inside a different perspective on the problem. So we have 6 of the member states, these competent authorities are under the national blood centers. 8 of them are under the Ministry of Health, and 8 of them are drug agencies. We'll show you just some data on the fragmentation of the legal framework of each of the member states, and specifically on section C, and particularly on, next slide, please, and next again. We just extracted 2 of the question. If on the right and left hand graphs, the question 15, if your country has a specific legislative framework, and on the graphs on the right hand, if your country has a general national program of policies on the collection of plasma intended to fractionation. But these data are summed up in the graphs inside, where the inner circle represent each of the member states, and we can see the fact that many of the country they do not have neither or a policy or a legislative framework for plasma. White cells are no answers. And only in few of them we have specific frameworks on a regulatory point of view and specific program and policies. Next slide, please. Question 21 and question 22 were related to the policies or something related about the legislative framework or policies about access, management of access on the left side, and managing of the shortages on the right side. Sorry, I cannot see it very well. Even in this, about this issue, the great majority of, at least the half of the member states, they do not have no policies or legal framework for access or shortages issues on PDMPs. Next slide, please. Some preliminary considerations. Well, we are trying to understand how the trends of the collection for public and private sector, for also for the clinical use of plasma. And we try to understand what is the dynamics observed during the 19 and 2020, and also collection, and about the discarded plasma. In Europe, we discard several kilograms of plasma nowadays. We can say as a preliminary analysis that in the member state scenario, in the panorama, about 1/3 of the plasma collected is sold to different companies for manufacturing PDMPs. 1/3 of the member states, they have a single relation to a single manufacturer, and 1/3 they sold or they manufacture PDMPs under toll manufacturing agreements. On legislative framework program policies on collection and prioritizing use, we can say that there is a governance gap of this issue and different kind of governance in this issue between the member states. No, we faced probably the consciousness of the single competent authorities to have a clear picture of what's happening inside their country, and this is something to address with this recommendation we are going to, I hope, to finalize by the end of the 18 months supply project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabio and Daphne. Thank you for your contribution. Now we could have swift tour de table, giving the floor to our distinguished guests, patients, health professionals, and industry. Who wants to break the ice? Josie, you're first. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Josie Drabwell, and I'm a board member of the International Patient Organization for Primary Immunodeficiency. And I'm also a patient who uses immunoglobulin because I have common variable immunodeficiency. So this is a stakeholders meeting that is really close to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose. Would you like to add some remarks or some comments from your point of view to these presentations, and then we can open the discussions with concrete questions, or you prefer to wait for? Okay, thank you. So from someone, I can see, I need glasses. Someone on the website, Ole Weiss. Ole? Or Oli, I don't know how to pronounce, sorry for that. Oli Weiss Björn.
Yes, hello, I hope you can hear me. Thank you, Chair. My name is Ole Weiss Bjørn. I'm a hematologist in Denmark and I represent EHA. I think the three presentations addressed separate aspects and at the same time illustrate the complex nature of this problem, and I was surprised of some of the even preliminary data on how different the collection of plasma, for instance, is. I think we have to accept that although progress has been made in treatment with drugs, the immunoglobulins still has a key role in conditions like immunodeficiencies, both the acquired one and as adverse events to treatment, or congenital immunodeficiencies, and in autoimmune mediated disorders, which are those I meet mostly. And despite the introduction and approval of novel drugs, it may never be possible to replace EVICs from plasma with a synthetic drug with the same quality and mode of actions. So also, I think we must be careful to maintain efficacy of the EVICs and not to change dose and intervals to reduce the use without evidence. And although the EVICs have side effects, the treatment is rarely toxic when used in the dosing normally administered, whereas a low dose may be insufficient clinically and have consequences for the patient. And this is a concern we must bear in mind. So it's very valuable to collaborate on the shortages in immunoglobulins to make sure that guideline recommendations follow and try to describe the lowest effective dose. One problem is that trials throughout the years have compared immunoglobulins with other drugs, in particular the corticosteroids in autoimmune mediated conditions, whereas in newer drugs, I think the immunoglobulins may have been administered in the control groups as part of best available treatment or physician's choice. And this makes the interpretation of previous data more difficult to disentangle the results. The use of IVIG as immunoglobulin and immunomodulation in hematology is mostly part of frontline treatment, which in itself therefore restricts the consumption. I think it's rational to prioritize indications, as we saw in the last presentation in work package 6, where other or novel drugs may be used in most patients replacing IVIG, and in particular to collaborate how to implement such recommendations. It may be considered to request circumstances for the use of immunoglobulins as sort of add-on to recommendations, and this may be a challenge. And in, for instance, in immune thrombocytopenia, as an example, it may be that a very low number of platelets should be measured to administer IVIG. It should be that suboptimal response or resistance to other therapies were observed. And it may include an assessment of bleeding symptoms and risk in order to use the immunoglobulins in this condition. But again, it may be difficult to add on these considerations to establish guidelines, and we have to collaborate how to implement this. The more stringent use may be one of the ways to manage the problem, and for immunoglobulins in substitution therapy, some careful analysis of the low concentrations and nadir concentrations may add to more individual dosing, sparing the use of immunoglobulins, but it will, if this measure was used, involve more monitoring, time for patients, and other activities to implement. So please permit me at this workshop to suggest that we express our gratitude to the unique effort of blood donors in Europe and worldwide. And to close the workshop today, the initiatives on the topic are very welcome clinically and regulatory to improve the resilience on consequences of the imbalance between the access to and need for immunoglobulins in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss, for putting on the table the question, the matter of the demand. We have been talking more about the supply, the problems of the supply, but it's we have to work also on the field of the demand. Gerald Gogarty.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to this meeting. Jerry Yogarty, DH, over from London, and just really reflecting on some of the comments earlier today, Tony Humphrey's reflection on the importance of increasing supply and getting new entrants into the market, and Emer Cook's comments on the need to focus on availability, and possibly the single biggest lever to make a difference in the short term is the re-entry of UK into the market. And there'll be two clear benefits that former residents of the UK donating blood and plasma for fractionation deliver. First, a significant simplification of the regulatory pathway for every member state and blood service to increase their blood and plasma donor base, with the confidence that fractionators with European manufacturing facilities will accept plasma from previous residents of the UK. And we have seen already in the last year the significant impact in Australia since donations from former UK residents recommenced. And secondly, the acceptance of UK plasma for fractionation in European facilities could deliver a major boost to availability of PDMPs across EU member states. Today, the UK consumes a significant quantity of PDMPs, all of which are derived from plasma collected in Europe and the US. UK plasma will be used to manufacture PDMPs for the UK market, reducing the amount it needs to purchase and enabling greater availability of PDMPs for EU member states, a major European Commission policy goal, drivers of which were so clearly articulated today. So our shared view with industry and patient partners across Europe is that the UK's return to plasma for medicines can be a total win-win. And we welcome the opportunity to collaborate with EMA and European Commission to enable this benefit for patients and health systems across the whole European continent.
Thank you. Now, Leire.
Thank you very much, Maria, for giving me the floor in representation of the International Patient Organization for Primary Immunodeficiencies, or IPOPI in short. So the topic of sustainable access to immunoglobulins, as Josie has said, is key for patients that we represent. So for patients with primary immunodeficiencies, they have an immune system that does not work adequately or at all. This means that if left undiagnosed or not adequately treated, the defective immune system leads to illness, disability, permanent organ damage, or even death. There are around 485 different PIDs, and a majority of our patients require immunoglobulin replacement therapy. For these patients, there is no alternative treatment. They either receive immunoglobulins as prescribed by the treating physician, and if not, they will not be able to have an optimal health status or lead normal lives. The unique nature of IGs for patients with PIDs has been recognized by the World Health Organization in its essential medicines list for adult and pediatric population, as well as by the Council of Europe, just to name a few. So immunoglobulins are scarce biological medicines in which each immunoglobulin therapy is different from the others and cannot be interchanged. They depend on the availability of the starting material, which is human plasma. The development of the therapy depends on blood and plasma donors. And as we have already discussed today, if there are not enough donations, there will not be sufficient starting material. And plasma for fractionation of medicinal products is also not a medicine. And therefore, the legislative framework governing it's very different from the one operating for medicines such as IGs. Immunoglobulins depend on blood and plasma donors, and they are also developed through a lengthy process that takes from 6 to 10 months. And the difference in the manufacturing process will result in different types of immunoglobulins that, depending on the profile and the needs of the patient, on the individual patient, they will be more or less tolerated. Thanks to the advances in medicines and awareness, an increased number of patients with PIDs is diagnosed. In many cases, after a shorter diagnostic odyssey, as well as new indications are discovered for which immunoglobulins are a first-line treatment. All this results in a growing demand for immunoglobulin therapies that is not coupled with the same increase in the plasma collection capacity. The complexity in getting the starting material and the manufacturing process, we need to add another facet, which is whether the products are available and accessible to the patient. And this opens up a new whole chapter. Starting from the basis that immunoglobulins are scarce, we need to consider the purchasing system in the countries, regions, or even hospitals, and how these therapies are allocated. Immunoglobulins are not just used by patients with primary immunodeficiencies, not at all. Patients with PIDs represent perhaps around 25% of the users of these therapies. Having said that, let us look at the challenges patients with PIDs are facing in their access to IGs. During the summer of 2022, IPOPI ran a survey amongst these European PID patient organizations to understand patients' access to IGs. In 12 out of 16 countries, patients with PIDs reported experiencing shortages. The most affected route was subcutaneous, but it should be noted that at the time, 3 out of 15 countries reported a shortage affecting both intravenous and subcutaneous. These had concrete consequences for patients with PIDs, none of which was acceptable. For instance, the delay in the infusion schedule, lowering the dosage of the immunoglobulin received. And let me remind you that among the the amount of therapy is calculated on the basis of the patient's weight and characteristics. So lowering the dosage would have a negative impact on their ongoing health and quality of life. Another concrete consequence was changing the route of administration, or changing brands within the same group, or in some cases not accepting new patients, even when the diagnosis had been made and the immunoglobulin replacement therapy was prescribed. The consequences for the patients were clear: distress and anxiety, delayed treatment, degrading quality of life, and increased infections. And in terms of the causes of the shortage given to the national patient organizations, they consisted on drop in plasma collection, the tender system in place, a poor forecasting in the needs of patients with PIDs, but also with other conditions, and supply chain problems. The results of this survey have shown the complexity of the situation for patients with PIDs and the negative consequences a tension or a shortage of IG may have in patients' health. It should also be noted that the situation can evolve very fast due to the limited amount of therapy. One manufacturing problem with one product may lead to tensions in another product. In this fast evolving scenario, IPOPI, the organization representing patients with PIDs worldwide, acknowledges and thanks the EMA for this effort in organizing a workshop and dedicate a specific agenda item to immunoglobulins. We hope that with today's and tomorrow's sessions, we will be one step closer to improving the availability of immunoglobulin therapies for patients with PIDs. And I thank you very much and look forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Leire. Evelina from PPTA.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this and for this interesting presentation and discussions. So PPTA is a trade association presenting the private sector collectors and manufacturers of plasma-derived therapies who constitute the vast majority of plasma master file holders, marketing authorization holders, as well as the fractionators in the EU. So as already in the presentations was outlined, we know that EU has a shortfall of plasma. To meet current IG patient needs, it's around 3 million liters of plasma is needed. We know that during the past decade, the demand for IGs has doubled and it continues to increase at around 7 to 8% every year, which means that national policies and volumes collected in the member states will have direct impact on the availability of the PDMPs or the IGs. Therefore, we really welcome this discussion and the recognition of the collection of plasma as one of the root causes that causes availability of the final product. In EU, the collection of plasma is very uneven. That's what we heard already from the previous presentations. Indeed, 4 countries collect around 55% of plasma in the EU: Czechia, Hungary, Austria, and Germany. That are exactly 4 countries that have private sector collectors operating in the country alongside the public sector. And PPTA members operate around 150 centers in the EU. And industry over past decades proved that we are able to deliver safe products to EU patients, also at the same time ensuring safety of donors, as donor adverse events are comparable to those of the whole blood donors, and also ensuring a safety of the final product. Well, as Stefan mentioned, the collection of plasma is the remit of the EU member states, and more policies needed in order to collect more plasma. We need to ensure that when we speak about addressing shortages of final product, we consider the unique nature of the PDMPs. So indeed, the starting material, the API of the PDMP, human collected plasma. And when issuing any assessments, recommendations, or guidelines for PDMP supply, this needs to be taken into consideration. To meet ever-growing demand, as I mentioned, collection will be very important, but there are a lot of other measures that needs to be also considered and taken into account that are not necessarily only member states' responsibility, but what can be done by stakeholders all here in the room. So, for example, as what was mentioned already, the revision of SOHO, substance of human origin regulation, but also the pharmaceutical legislation, that is currently soon upcoming needs to consider the possible regulatory flexibilities and regulatory provisions for the EU plasma master file holders. For example, updating certain plasma master file guidelines to ensure that plasma master file holders can enter new plasma centers or relocated centers easier and quicker into the file, especially for the establishments that were already well known. The risk-based approach should be applied, and recategorization of these updates should be considered. I'm not sure if that was planned in the context of SOHO or pharmaceutical legislation revision, but would be happy to hear more comments on that. Also, inspections. This is something what also was mentioned already before. In order to for the plasma master file holders to release plasma for manufacturing, centers in the EU, but also in the US, need to be inspected. Under the current blood directive, it's every 2 years. SOHO extends it to 4 years, I believe. Pharmaceutical legislation suggests what we heard, would consider also the frequency on the risk, based on the risk of inspections. I think that's very important to align those frameworks and make sure that inspections can be done on time. And here the EMA could play very important role in conversation with the member states to ensure better harmonization of the inspections of the plasma sites, but also introducing risk-based approach to the inspections based on the activity of the center and the compliance. Last but perhaps not least, very important, we do not exist in isolation, and the global cooperation is needed. COVID showed us how interdependent the supply chains are. So global cooperation with our key strategic partners and greater regulatory convergence with other countries is necessary. For example, advancement of the MRA, so mutual recognition of inspections, that is still overdue, the decision on the inclusion of plasma manufacturing sites, but perhaps finding some solution also for the inspections of the plasma collection sites will be really necessary. And I'll stop perhaps here, but maybe my colleagues also from Europa Bio or something will have comments. Thank you.
I have no comments. We aligned before, and I just do want to stress the regulatory flexibility, as Evelina just outlined in regards to the plasma master file procedure. So maybe you can, if there is room for that, comment on that question.
Walter Marocco on the screen on the WebEx, you have your hand raised. You have the floor.
Thanks for interesting session. I'd like only propose some suggestions, specifically two short comments. The first one is that the importance of supporting the different nations in adopting shortage management plans and in real-time monitoring of the availability of different products. The second is when we talk about shortages, we have to reflect that these are often due to the continuous emergence of a new indication for use, the increasing extensive off-label use, and the substantial uncertainty regarding the duration of a treatment. In case of serious shortcomings, we have to discuss about the reevaluation, the need for prescription only in compliance with the indications authorized by the technical data sheet. I think that this is a big problem. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Charlotte Roffian, representing France Asso Santé, which is an alliance of patient organizations in France. I have a question actually regarding the supply projects, which I find indeed very interesting. Are you planning to collect data on the impact of shortages of immunoglobulins and other products derived from plasma on patients? Because we've heard and we know that that obviously issues about access to immunoglobulins as a consequence of the plasma shortage and the shortage of immunoglobulins in general. And several countries have put in place restriction policies prioritizing the allocation of plasma to certain patients. So I was wondering whether that's in the agenda of the project, because obviously I believe so. It's also a way in order to evaluate the efficiency of the policies which have been implemented in a context of a huge shortage, which is very long lasting.
It's a question that Daphne, would you take it?
Yes,
Thank
of
you.
course. Well, I'm not sure if the direct consequences as such are a specific goal within our supply project, but we do investigate the prioritization of the PDMPs in the different countries, and in order to do that, the consequences for the patients are, of course, part of that analysis. So this is part, I guess, of the recommendation we come up with. But on the other hand, there are people from EHA in this room and also online, so maybe they can comment on that as well. I'm not sure.
I would leave Ola to comment. Ola, are you still there?
Yes, Robin, I'm still here. I had a bit difficulty to hear the question, but I understood it was on prioritization of the use of plasma-derived products. I think I briefly addressed this issue and how to...
Sorry, Ola, can I interrupt you straight
Yes.
away? Sorry
Yes.
to do so, but the specific question was on the consequences on patients.
Oh.
Yeah, so patient health. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, it will be at a very high level, I'm afraid, because of course the patient safety is number one priority. Well, I'm still not sure I really get the context. Sorry. Please, could you elaborate?
Ole, if I may, I think that the question is about if we have analyzed and we know, or you from the supply project, the effects of the shortages of immunoglobulins on patients. These shortages or this potential lack of supply has had impact on the health of patients, as we can imagine, or it hasn't been measured.
I'm not sure it has been measured, at least not in the institutions where I'm working. And I think it would be difficult because in hematology there's a number of other drugs which may be used, except in the replacement therapy. So perhaps the representative for immunodeficiency may have some information too, due to the need for immunoglobulin in these diseases.
Yes, maybe I can comment very briefly with regard to the supply project. Ola is our clinician. I'm representing EHA amongst others in the supply project, but this has not been measured yet. So we will be involving patients in the development, collect their input for the development of recommendations on appropriate and prioritization of use of immunoglobulins. But that still needs to happen. So right now there's preparatory work being done in the form of surveys, interviews. So that is still forthcoming.
Thank you. Maybe this clarifies your question. Something, Caroline?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to complement because we had also this discussion as part of the blood product working party, which is now the hematology working party, on how to prioritize indications. And obviously the immunoglobulins are authorized for several indications, so not only hematology, but also CNS indications. So it has actually a wider impact because a lot of authorization is in different various therapeutic areas. But from EMS side, we have decided, and this was also discussed at our committee, so at the CHMP, that it should be a member state recommendation, and obviously it's also a treatment guideline initiative to some extent, because it depends also on how the immunoglobulins are authorized and reimbursed in each member state. So for EMA, it would be very difficult to come up with a prioritization of indications at the EU level, because this varies significantly across member states. So we have then decided to then leave it up to the member states to make these recommendations. And as far as we understand, there are a lot of recommendations already available. I mean, the UK started this a while ago, and it's very comprehensive. They have a UK demand plan. The French agency also has something very elaborate, and as well as the Italian agency. And I think several member states also have come up with their own prioritization of indications. But I agree, this is also coming into the treatment guidelines perspective and the usage of immunoglobulins. So this would be also from EHA for the hematology indication perspective.
Yes, exactly. And that is, of course, what we will be trying to do, because national recommendations are wonderful, but of course it is a level of alignment that we need, and certainly also the connection with the guidelines.
Yeah, just wanted to elaborate on that. What I was also referring to is that what would be interesting is to see whether some member states have evaluated the impact of the recommendation and prioritization plan on patients' care and patients' health. Because obviously we are dealing with a situation of insufficient supply. So some patients who could benefit from immunoglobulins still cannot access it because there is not sufficient supply, which means that it can damage their health, even if in some cases there are substitute therapies, but which can be not as efficient, which can have higher side effects, etc. So I believe it would be interesting to evaluate the impact on the public policies on patients. Thank you.
Yes, Josie.
I'm sorry, I'm desperately trying to find the answers, but I can't at this minute, because we did a survey in about 2018. We started, because that's when the first shortage happened, to see how it was affecting patients. And of course, there was a large amount of patients who were affected because they had to switch products, and they went from intravenous to subcutaneous and vice versa. And we have the results somewhere in here. And then, of course, then COVID came, and that made it even worse. It meant that patients were put on a lesser dose, longer time in between. And it meant that people were becoming more ill. They could not go and see their physicians, although they had Zoom contact, but they actually didn't meet them face to face. And as a result, there were a lot of severe regression in people's health. And I think it seems to sort of, being hidden, because if you spread out the supply of immunoglobulin, of course, it doesn't look as if there's that much severe shortage, because everyone is getting a little bit, but of course there is. So it has been so far a very difficult route. I will try and find my survey.
For the summary. Who else is asking for the floor? Evelina, please go ahead.
So Evelina from PPTA. Indeed, I mean, it's very important topic for discussion, but in terms of the definitions for criteria for the use of immunoglobulins, or I think it's first of all, was word that it needs to be patient-centric. Patients should be at the very core of that. And PPTA will be publishing soon a green paper on this topic as well, in collaboration with healthcare professionals from different fields. We'll be happy to share once this is finalized and available. One perhaps just quick comment in this regard. I don't think that the label use, off-label use, that's appropriate segregation or stratification at this stage. But because for many indications, especially for rare and ultra rare diseases, the data for regulatory approval, it's very difficult to get, or not even possible, or in many cases also unethical to collect that data. So therefore, maybe different options for data collection, I don't know, real world evidence, patient reported data, that's something that could be considered for the future indications. Thank you.
Okay. Linda Larsson, yes, you have your hand raised.
Yes, hi. I'm Linda Larsson. I'm from the National Board of Health and Welfare, the Swedish NCA for blood. And I just wanted to bring in the blood establishment perspective to this, because blood establishments, as we know, they are currently under a lot of stress. There's a lot of things going on. The upcoming non-DHP transition for blood bags, it's a demand for the implementation of components for trauma and emergencies, and there's the urgency of further implementation of pathogen inactivation measures, just to mention a few of them. And so compared to all of these ongoing activities, there are unfortunately no really great incentives for the blood establishments to dedicate time and energy in collecting more plasma for a product that is a bit on the side of the other activities that they have. And they do not directly benefit from investing in this product, even though the patients, of course, benefit from it. But and also, as Daphne said, the reimbursement from the industry doesn't cover the costs of the extended work very well. And I think there's also fear of competition between whole blood donors and plasma donors, that there might be a shortage in other components that are probably closer to the blood establishment's interest. So not to be resolved today, but just take-home questions is, first of all, how do we inspire the blood establishments to prioritize the plasma collection for PDMPs and the fractionation industry? And should it be a priority for the blood establishments? And also, if we convert whole blood donors to plasma donors, how do we collect more plasma while also ensuring that we don't cause unnecessary shortage in other components? Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you. Thank you for that, Linda. I think that Daphne would like to answer your questions. Please.
Yeah, so thank you, Linda. Indeed, so you brought up a lot of issues that are indeed impacting blood establishments at the moment. There are a few things I would like to comment on as a representative of the European Blood Alliance, representing a lot of blood banks here in this room. I do not totally recognize the fact that blood establishments do not see the benefits, because of course they collect blood and plasma for patients. So both of them are important. And I agree with you that setting up plasmapheresis programs is expensive. So that is an issue. But the fact that you can recruit donors both for whole blood and plasma is actually a great advantage that we also saw during the COVID pandemic, that we need, for example, if you are in need of whole blood, you can convert your plasma donors back to whole blood donors, and vice versa. Once you have enough whole blood donors, you can convert them to plasma donors. So this is actually the opposite. There is a big benefit for blood establishments who collect both whole blood and plasma to collect plasma as well. And then within the EBA, there's a lot of attention to this. So collecting more plasma is actually one of the strategic themes of EBA that we're working on, well, for the last couple of years already. And I think the supply project is an excellent example of the fact that we do see the importance to collect more plasma for patients in Europe. So I would really like to stress that for EBA and blood establishments, it's very important to collect more plasma, and that we ask also for attention to this issue, and that we would like to contribute in solving this problem of not having enough plasma. So I think we need help, that's for sure. And the help for the blood establishments should come from member states and from competent authorities and from, public policies. If they also admit that it is the role of the blood establishments to do more, this would really help solve this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. May I comment back, please? I just want to thank you for the comment, and I think what you propose is a good way of making blood establishments see the urgency if they don't do it today. Of course, some already do it, but for some, they just see the works. I think that might be a good answer to which approach that could be taken. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Karin Magnussen. You are writing on the chat box. Maybe you would like to jump in and tell us what your reflection.
Yes, hi, I'm here as a representative of the World Blood Donor Organizations. And I actually already wrote it in the chat, but if you have the voluntary non-remunerated blood donation system that you have in most of Europe, you will be sure to have donors that will present when there's a need of the patients. Much more of this type of donors could be recruited, but as Daphne just said, you need support from the health systems in the different countries. The blood donors are very happy to be flexible. Some donors prefer the plasmapheresis or the whole blood, and you can also interchange between giving plasma and whole blood depending on the need, but support to the blood centers is definitely needed to set up a bigger system to collect more plasma.
Thank you, Karin. Very interesting. I think that Josie would like to add some remarks to your comment or something new. Josie.
Hello, Karen. It's Josie here. We discuss this very often, and I think from from history, there seems to be two different types of donors. One is a plasma donor, and one is a whole blood donor. And there might be some overlap, but most of the time there are two different types of people. So I think I think that is not an issue. But what I was actually going to ask Stefan, if I may, and it is to do about the price of the plasmapheresis. During COVID, the EU was able very quickly to turn on a lot of plasma collection centers for convalescent plasma to see if that was going to be a helpful remedy for COVID. And I believe in no time at all, there were 150 plus centers in 14 countries which had the ability to collect plasma through the plasmapheresis. And that meant staff, equipment, etc., which was, I think, about 35 million euros. And what's happened to those centers? What happened to that expensive equipment? I mean, clearly we could all do with more plasmapheresis. So if those sort of centers could be reignited or research, something so that we can start immediately because that was up and running. So that's my question.
Thanks, Joseph, for that question. Indeed, you're referring to the initiative we took during the COVID crisis to invest in particular in equipment across centers in indeed 13 EU countries, and it was also in the UK. We know that they have been able to collect units for possible use of COVID convalescent plasma. And indeed, it was a relatively easy decision to make at the high level in the EU, because we know that the capacity would be helpful also for the broader picture. But in the end, it's only a small part. If you compare, I think there were around 300 equipments in the end that were installed extra. And I think what we also learned from it is it's not enough just to invest and have equipment. You need organizational change, you need trainings, you need skilled staff, and so there's quite something more to do than just having equipment available. Normally we don't do that. Normally we do not invest for the member states in their healthcare systems, but in this extraordinary situation it was possible. I think what we learned is really that there's need for a broader support than just that, and that's also why we see quite some value in the supply action and in knowledge exchange between different blood centers. As I think I indicated, there are some countries that we have noticed in the last year that with success are growing their plasma collection with new plasmapheresis programs. Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands. So I think there's a lot that can be learned from that in other EU member states, and that is something definitely that we can support further at the EU level.
Thank you, Stefan. You're making my job really easy. This is a very active group. It's a pleasure to be facilitator of this group. So Robert first and Johan Andersson afterwards. Please, Robert Weiss, go ahead.
Thank you very much. We'll be very quick. First, thanks for the presentations. Second, one thing I would like to add to Mrs. Daphne Tyson's presentation. I would like to agree. We share here something like that it is really a challenge to collect plasma in Europe. So we have also challenges in getting donors. And secondly, it is costly. And we already heard Stefan van der Spiegel that that is much more than just ordering plasmapheresis equipment. Nevertheless, in Van der Spiegel's presentation, there was one graph about plasmapheresis donations in Europe, and I was missing Austria. As I can remember, or as I know, we report this data regularly to the Austrian agency to have these numbers available. What I have to see here is that also in Austria, the volume of plasma was decreasing in the last 5 years. Significantly because of these challenges. And last but not least, maybe to one of your first points about donor health, I would like to address that also for PPDA. I'm speaking on behalf of PPDA today. This is a high priority, and I would like to add here that besides to the regulations and the measures in place in Europe to provide donor health, we have at PPDA a donor adverse events monitoring and trending system, which is in place for years now. And besides trending this within our companies, we also report hemovigilance and plasmavigilance data to the national authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments. Maybe just to explain, I did not present Austria because the data that came to me did not include the 2019 data for Austria. I don't know why personally, but maybe somebody of EduCam can explain. But it's true as you say. I think it would be one of those countries with high volumes. But I also noted from a 2020 to 21 comparison, and that there was a drop in collections in Austria. So it's something indeed we need to be all cautious of, that those important countries for collection also sometimes can have problems for collection. And of course, on your vigilance efforts and reporting of serious adverse events for donors, I think that is really appreciated. Today, that is actually not mandatory under EU legislation to report problems with donors, and that's really a shortcoming that we need to address. But legally, it will be addressed. But I understand for PPTA, it will not be. It will be something that they're doing anyhow already, so it might not be that big a step.
Thank you. Your first question was to Daphne?
Well, I just wanted to add that it is also for private plasma collection centers a challenge to get enough attention that donors come to our centers. So it's not forgiven.
Okay.
And, I think that's what we share.
Okay, thank you. And now, Johan.
Yeah, three short reflections. First one, purely personal, anecdotal, but as Yossi said, I've been donating whole blood my whole life. I've never even been asked if I wanted to donate plasma, I think. Just personal reflection. The other one is on an even broader topic for those of us working with shortages. Monica, thought about the peoples in the room. We see a lot of different situations with immunoglobulins, with thrombolytics, with antibiotics, with GLP-1s, where we have supply, but not enough supply. And it would be really interesting to see if we can see any similarities between these. So that's a topic that's not discussed today, but still, that's something for us to work further with. So on the topic today, I'm working at the Swedish Medical Products Agency, and we monitor shortages. And I have numbers, but of course, 2023 is really early yet. But my impression from the numbers is that we actually have fewer shortages today, at least in Sweden, than we had in 2021 and 2022. But after discussing today, I am curious if this is due to lowering the demand through recommendations rather than actually increasing the supply, which in that case would reflect badly on well, it would cause harm to patients. Yeah.
Yeah. Follow up. I have the answer. Sorry, I do have some feedback on that we received from our Swedish patient organization on the situation in Sweden. So I will happy to continue the discussion. Yeah.
And Johan, if I may, one common reason for the three kind of shortages that you have mentioned is related with the demand, an increase in demand for the three groups of medicines. Maybe that the reasons for the not being able to meet the demand are different for every group of medicines, and they need different solutions. But we are living an increase of the demand of many medicines because, well, we have older population in Europe, higher standards of health, many other reasons that we know well. Another comment at the end of the row.
Thank you, Maria. So I'm from the Medicines Agency in Ireland that looks after shortages as well, and it's somewhat a complementary point to Johan's, because I was reflecting on what people were saying, and a lot of the discussion has been focused on collection and getting that. is that the only thing? Is this the silver bullet that's all we need to do? Or our experience with shortages, as Johan has illustrated, is fairly more complex than that. So that's one part of it. What else is missing in terms of getting product to people? Never mind just a demand increase. What other parts? What other levers are there that are missing in terms of that cause shortages, not just the source?
Yes, as we can see, is a multifactorial problem with different dimensions to be observed and analyzed. As long as the discussion go further, we can find many other aspects, also minimal aspects such as Evelina's ones like PMF for the new centers. There's more. The three dimension, as I observed, the thing is also the supply and collection problems. Okay, the demand and the appropriate of use, but there is also from the starting material and an RPA and a starting material to the final vial. There's the industrial capability of getting as much as more proteins as possible in terms of yields that the industry can guarantee to the to the owners of the plasma or to the patients. It is not possible nowadays to accept the situation where the global players of plasma now they offer to the for manufacturing yields that differs from one of each other in terms of 25% in comparison from two companies, for example. And 25% is a very huge, it's a huge of products that can be found inside the same plasma. This must be, I think, a point that should be discussed inside PPTA in the mutual competition, but fair competition between among companies. Thank you.
Christine. Yeah, later.
Just to that, to answer to Darren's question, I mean, from the results of the survey that IPOPI ran amongst these national, European national patient organization, one of the elements that was considered to be one of the reasons for the IG shortages were the poor forecasting of the demand of, I mean, from IG for PID patients, but also for other type of indications, and also the tender system in place in the different countries. Whether there was only one product, for instance, considered per administration route, and therefore if you would have a problem in that specific product that made it to the end, then you wouldn't have a problem with no product at all for patients. And also, well, low prices was also another reason proposed in the tenders, and the pharmaceutical companies not answering tenders.
We are running out of time. If we want to adjust to a schedule, we should begin to wrap up the session and to find common key messages. So now begins the difficult job from my side. Yeah, Josie?
Well, I have a suggestion. You know, years ago, when we had national plans for rare diseases, why can we not put into place national plans for plasma policies so that every EU member state also follows certain guidelines? So at least we begin to have maybe some cohesion. Suggestion.
Thank you. I think that this is aligned with some suggestion that has been put on the table before. Yeah, Daphne, please go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you. This is indeed something that we would really endorse from the supply or the EBA point of view. We definitely need policies, but on a lot of aspects. So policies on the tendering, so ownership of plasma, policies on prioritization and consequences for patients, but also policies on the role of the blood establishments and the amount of plasma that needs to be collected by a country. So there are many things that need to be addressed in such a national plan, but I really like your suggestion.
Something for the Spanish presidency, Maria. Something for the Spanish presidency.
Yeah.
She's taking over July 1st from Sweden.
Thank you. Try to summarize and get some conclusions of this extraordinary brainstorming and session. Let's begin with the diagnosis, and then we can set the treatment if you agree with that. So the diagnosis, the first thing we can agree is that there is a disbalance between supply and demand of immunoglobulins. All of us agree on that. I hope someone else is taking notes and helping me. Emilia, you are? Yeah, okay. So I've been highlighting what I thought could be key messages, and I have so many lines highlighted. Another thing that, for me at least, has been surprising comes from the surveys. We have seen that when we ask to the manufacturers or to the plasma master files holders which are their plans, the forecast, and how if they have inventory, they say they don't have any problem. They have enough inventory for the following year. And the following year, when we ask to the national competent authorities, 14 out of 19 have problems with the shortages. So they don't have very good forecast systems. The information that companies are managing and the information that they are providing to us is not good, it's not accurate, and we cannot have plans to mitigate and to prevent shortages if we don't have good information. We can agree with that. Following with the diagnosis. Sorry, Olga.
Yeah, I actually had this question. I should have asked that before. Demand forecasting is a challenge. And when we were actually speaking to Klaus and contributed to the survey, to the latest one that you presented, that was one of our major questions, how to forecast demand. And for us, it's really a challenge because demand and even your comment, Carolyn, I mean, even treatment guidelines, they can impact demand. How do we determine demand and who is doing that? Is it all on the suppliers, manufacturers? I'm not sure. I don't think so. So I don't know, Robert, if you want to comment as well.
Well, industry is supplying the plasma, but somebody is actually, giving the advice for treatment to patients. And I think this demand is then actually triggered by this part of the process. And it's as Olga already explained, it's therefore not that easy to provide this forecast information, and especially in the setting of reporting this information locally, nationally, and then also on an EMA level. It is also kind of difficult in regards of competition questions about
Yeah,
that.
and it's not my intention to open a discussion about this because we have no time, but I think that when we ask you which is your plans for the following years, and we are asking if you are able to meet the demand, we just want to know if you are able to meet the trend in the demand, the increasing rates of demand, what you are analyzing. It's easy for you. It's something that you are doing in your company for many reasons, not only to meet the demand, but also to meet your company requirements from many angles. So then we, the regulators, will collect all the information and we can check if your estimations are realistic or are not. But the first point is that the first step is that you give us your best information and you try to collect the best information. You have to work on gathering intelligence. But I wouldn't like to stop to discuss this more time because we need another session for this. So let's move on to another point. Another thing, Josie.
Just one quick point. We always reckoned that it was about a 5% increase in normal years of the use. In the last few years, it has increased by over 25% because secondary immunodeficiencies have joined primary immunodeficiencies, the same condition, and they need the same amount of immunoglobulin. So, and that has not always been taken into consideration.
Yeah, Josie, but that goes with the business. All of us know that the use of anti-CD20, for example, medicines in oncology, finally originates an increase in demand of immunoglobulin. So, yeah.
Jakub Velik, Czech Medicine Agency. Maybe we as the regulators are, let's say, more known about, let's say, other group of medicine, and trust me that there are groups that are more turbulent and people can do proper forecast and avoid shortages of some groups. I think immunoglobulins is the area where we can somehow define very properly the forecast for the next year based on, let's say, new patient therapies, new approaches, and many aspects, and also historical sales. What is important for the markets and regulators? If you somehow, let's say, define a forecast, you deliver it, let's say, on time manner, because every single shortage will create some chaos or some stress on the markets that is most problematic. And maybe I would reflect what was said, that there are other groups of problematic areas where the demand is over the supply possibility of manufacturers, and sometimes, let's say, some eliminating of free trade, monitoring and open forecast, and let's say control distribution helps very much to stabilize the market. This is my first learning from this exercise.
Can I? May I?
Yes, Richard, I was missing you.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you. So Richard Bergström, I'm with IQVIA, old IMS. And I'm not going to talk about what we are doing on this, but I need to reflect on the discussion, because as you know, Maria, last 2.5 years, I've been one of the negotiators for the vaccine contracts for the EU. So if Politico is listening, take note of that. It was not the Commission President who negotiated. It was a team of people, me included. But what's very important, I picked this up, but it's beyond the EMA responsibility, of course, but the money, the markets, and this is this conversation we had on the vaccines. We all know that we pay different prices. Why do we do that? And the discussion was about, why are we paying more for these vaccines than for the flu vaccines? And then, of course, we reflected and said, those have been commoditized. We had seen, no offense, GSK, Sanofi, but, we have seen very little technological development with flu vaccines. They're still manufacturing eggs. It's a 50-old year technology. And why is that? Because no one has been willing to pay for investments, because it was all tendered. It was all commoditized. So I think that's something I take back from this conversation, is that somebody has to reflect on that. How do we make sure that there's money into the system to make the investments that are necessary, and don't fall for this urge of always just going for the lowest price, because then you're not going to get the investments from the private sector.
The factor of money, pricing, investment. Yeah. Yeah, Charlotte.
Yeah, indeed, we've been talking very little of money in this workshop, while that's certainly important. But I would like to report something that happened in France in October 2021. We have had a huge increase of price on 2 immunoglobulins because of the situation of shortage. And based on the fact that obviously there was an issue with plasma, with the API, and it has had no impact on the situation of shortage. So let's think about it. So in this situation we're facing, maybe the issue is not price. So
take note, money, pricing, and access, and and the relationship with the availability. If we go on with comments that could be related with the diagnosis of the situations. I would say that we need more information about the root causes. You have said that you are performing a detailed analysis, and I think it's necessary. For me, it's curious that only 13% of the reasons are commercial reasons. And maybe that after many of other reasons, like unpredicted major events or increase of demand, there is also a commercial reason. The lack of willingness to invest on increasing the production, for example. And this is not always well recognized when we ask for the root causes, the causes of shortages, not only with immunoglobulins, this happens with all the medicines. We have talked a lot. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I think there's a difference between plasma-derived medicines and other medicines, because plasma-derived medicines are derived from plasma. So if you talk about investments, you can invest in the public sector and in the private sector. And I agree that both are necessary. Private sector to invest in novel technologies, novel PDMPs, but public sector as well to recruit more donors and collect more plasma. So this is really something I would like to see in your recommendations, please.
About the collection, but that's not only the only step that we have to analyze and to provide solutions to increase the supply. There are important differences in the production from plasma. As Fabio has mentioned before, there is a need to streamline the production. So when we can increase the supply, we have to work also not only in improving the collection, but also in improving the performance, the yield of all the processes that targeted to get immunoglobulins or other medicines derived from plasma. Regarding the collection, there are a lot of issues that we can put on our document or report. The need to the fragmented system across Europe, the different national policies across Europe, then the lack of harmonization, the importance of the supply project that could be, this could be the treatment. So let's go on with the diagnosis first. So a fragmented system in Europe around policy of collecting plasma. As blood systems are within national remit, Stefan said something very important, and this is also part of the treatment, but he said that the European Commission can support member states with EU budgets and coordinated plans. So I think that's a very good and welcome proposal. And if we move to the treatment, we need flexibility in many different areas. You have suggested flexibility in donor deferrals. We haven't talked about this, but I would have liked to listen to our hematologist here and blood center specialist about the inclusion of tattoos users and other donors that so far they are not considered, but need to add flexibility in donors. Flexibility for plasma master files. This has been raised by several industry associations. The need to increase the mutual recognition agreements of EMP inspections, and I know that all of us are working on that. I hope we have good news on that sooner than later. We need to provide recommendations, clinical recommendations about the best use of the immunoglobulins to prioritize indications, good clinical guidelines. I think that we have to make clear that we are aware of the clear necessity of immunoglobulins for patients and the damage, the harm the patients suffer when they don't receive the immunoglobulins they need. This is obvious, but not for that we have to forget it. In the diagnosis, we need to evaluate the impact that the lack of a continuous supply of immunoglobulins have in patients.
Could I add something?
Sure.
Sorry, me.
Yes.
Just on that, I mean, it would be good to understand that it needs to be the therapy that needs to be received should be as prescribed by the physician, following scientific guidelines and clinical guidelines, just to make sure that we avoid the trend that we are seeing in some countries, that because of the lack of therapy, they are trying to reduce the amount of immunoglobulin that is given to the individual patients. And we say, well, they are receiving the therapy, but it's not what they should be receiving, the amount of therapy that they should be receiving, or in the frequency that they should be receiving that therapy. So that it's a point that it would be good if it can be included.
This is included when we say that we need good clinical guidelines based on scientific-based guidelines. So,
but the prescription and the consideration that there's no shortage should be based on those guidelines. Because if we consider, I mean, we should not consider that because patients are receiving the therapy, there's no shortage. If those patients, for instance, instead of receiving intravenous immunoglobulin every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, they are receiving every 6 weeks, or instead of receiving a certain amount of immunoglobulin based on their body weight and their. So
we could be overlooking a shortage because
exactly
we are spreading out the available immunoglobulins. Yeah, we have to reflect that somehow.
Thank you.
Also guidelines and how is that implemented, because they're not implemented everywhere in the same way. For instance, in France, we know that according to the hospitals and the regions, the implementations of the guidelines differ quite a lot.
Maria, that's evidence-based prescription, right? That's fundamentally the issue.
We can report that. We have talked also about the different kind of donors and how we need flexibility for them to choose if they want to donate complete blood or plasma. We have seen also, and this falls within the diagnosis, a disbalance between the immunoglobulins from plasmapheresis or from blood fragmented blood, and there are a lack, or it seems there is a lack of plasmapheresis centers. Do you agree with that? So one of the actions that we have to
and facilitate the regulatory framework also for PMF and plasma collections, new plasma collection centers, as the colleague said.
It's already written. Uneven efficiency in manufacturing, I've said that before. They need policies, harmonized policies in how we ensure that. And the final step of access, that is the price and reimbursement and the price of medicines. We don't know yet which role pricing plays in this situation. I have to say that many of these conclusions are not regulatory related. We are crossing a lot of lines of our remit. So first of all, I would like to thank you all for your contributions, but I wouldn't dare to deliver some recommendations that fall under all responsibilities. We can mention that it has discussed here that price and reimbursement or the establishment of more plasmapheresis centers and the need for regulatory for collection is needed, but please, nobody must felt offense. Yes. You understand my point?
It seems we are flexible enough as regulators of medicine.
Okay.
I just didn't want to interrupt before, but because you mentioned on the donor deferral criteria. So because you said that you would like to speak to some physician, but perhaps also industry has a long term experience with donors. for plasmapheresis donors as well. And the donor deferral criteria for plasma that is collected purely for manufacturing reasons can be different from those from the whole blood donor. So that should be definitely taken into consideration because of the manufacturing process that afterwards. So plasmapheresis for manufacturing donors, deferral criteria might differ from the ones from donors, and that should be acknowledged as well.
Well, no, not okay.
Please, the methodical collection is the same. The donor is the same person. The methodical collection is the same procedure. It is under a proper transfusion medicine procedure. So how can you differ? And you don't even know which is the final destination of what they're collecting. So differentiate the patterns for this kind of donors, of this kind of blood or blood components. It's something that sounds me a little bit difficult to
I'm
understand.
referring more to plasma collection centers that collect only plasma, only for manufacturing purposes.
Yes, but they are performing a transfusion medicine activity. It's not a commercial activity, okay? They're not digging on the earth. They're doing a medicine, a transfusion medicine procedure, okay? That is under some regulatory framework.
I'm not sure if I understand, but the plasma that is collected purely for manufacturing purposes undergoes very complex process of pathogen eliminations and so on. And we have as well teams of people working on it and looking into different pathogens and so on.
It's the same plasma used for clinical use, for example.
Yeah,
it's the same plasma. It's the same starting material. Okay.
It is plasma, but the plasma that is collected purely for manufacturing in private centers, it's never used for transfusion.
No, but I welcome harmonization, and in my opinion, our plasma manufacturing company is more strict than we are on blood donors. So it's the other way around. So I welcome your suggestion that you are less, that there can be other criteria. But I agree with Fabio, since both we should look at donor safety first. So donor criteria should be the same for whole blood and plasma donors. And I would really suggest not to separate the two into two different pathways because they fall under the same regulation.
Donor criteria, yes, but the deferral criteria might differ, and even current the EDQM guidelines, they sometimes differentiate that some tests or something is not applicable for plasma for fractionation.
Thank you, Evelina, but this is not the moment to discuss how these criteria should be set. Anyway, as Stefan said before, GMPs and all the immunoglobulins or other medicines originated in plasma have to meet GMPs, and GMPs in this case of medicines comes from both regulations, blood components and pharma regulation. And I think that we have to put an end to this interesting session. It should have finished 10 minutes ago. So thank you very much, because you are really active, and this has been, for me at least, very enriching session. I hope you have enjoyed, and tomorrow we'll see how our colleagues are able to put in a short report everything we have discussed here. Thank you very much for your contributions.